Look closer. Scattered around a handful of rural communities in Michigan's Upper Peninsula are small tokens, reminders of our past, reminiscent of the bygone era of Finnish immigrants, those who pulled the stumps out of this earth to settle the area over 100 years ago. Look closer. One of the largest achievements of Finnish immigrants still stands today, still serving its community when so many others like it surrendered to the outside world. Look closer. There is still a landmark of Finnish American history, a symbol of collective effort, and there is still a community, cooperatively yours. A passerby traveling through the crossroads of US 45 and M28 might be surprised to find a large grocery store so far from anything else. But the 800 residents of Bruce Crossing don't think twice, because the Settlers Co-op has been here for as long as anyone can recall.
It was not this building at all. It was another little building on probably across the street. Very small store, but I wasn't around here when that big one got built. But such a change. That one was very little, had a meat department.
In the heyday of the cooperative movement in the early 20th century, there were approximately 175 Finnish American cooperative retail stores in the northern parts of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. Now there is just a handful left, and of them, the Settlers Co-op of Bruce Crossing, Michigan, stands above the rest. I'm not just telling you a story about a store. It's also a story about a community. The Finnish American cooperative movement was strongest and most active in the northern parts of the Midwest, also known as the Lake Superior region, where dozens of Finnish communities formed around mining, farming, and forestry jobs. The Finns were late to immigrate to the United States. Finnish migration started in earnest in the 1880s, with the majority immigrating from 1899 to 1914, just prior to World War I. During this period, a total of 230,000 immigrants left Finland.
There are a couple of theories that why Finns went especially to the Midwest, and one theory is that the region is quite similar with Finland. But probably the other explanation is much more valid, and that's because there was work available. It was not so much land available because the land was not so good.
Almost half of male immigrants initially found work in the copper and iron mines. A fifth of them found work in the lumber industry. As they were able, many returned to farming.
My great-grandfather Sampa, he came to the United States in 1900 with his brother Jaakko, and they started off working for Calumet and Hecla as trammers in the mine.
Mining was hard and dangerous. 1 out of 200 men were killed in the dark, treacherous mines. Unsafe work conditions, long days, and minimal wages caused a great deal of dissatisfaction among the miners in the copper country, leading to an intense, lengthy work stoppage that has lived in infamy since it began in 1913. Lasting until April of the following year, the strike is remembered most for the Italian Hall tragedy, where 73 people, mostly Finnish children, were killed during a Christmas Eve celebration as they tried to evacuate the building in a response to a false cry of fire. As a result of the Copper Country Strike of 1913, union agitators were blacklisted, and independent merchants and company stores refused to sell to strikers on credit. The Finnish immigrants needed a place to purchase goods, so the first consumers' cooperative store in Hancock, the Farmers Co-op Trading Company, was established in 1914. The strike also led to the mass exodus of Finnish immigrants south to return to their farming roots and settle the Ontonagon Valley and its small villages, including the town of Bruce Crossing.
I was born in Calumet, Michigan. And my folks came to Bruce Crossing. I guess there's property or jobs here or something. Copper mines have gotten kind of bad.
Bruce Crossing's humble beginnings harken to Donald Bruce, whose shanty stood on the corner of the DSS&A Railroad and the Old Military Road, where his makeshift inn catered to railroad builders and the lumberjacks of the Diamond Match Company. In short order, lumber barons leveled the virgin white pine forests. In resulting years, the tinder-dry slashings provided fodder for many a forest fire, leaving only charred stumps. Clever real estate agents used extensive advertising and offered these cutover lands for sale as farmland, clover-laden farmland, mostly to miners. Keith Myers reads his grandmother Elizabeth's recollection of her father, Charles Sillenpah, moving the family to Painesville, a small community 3 miles east of Bruce Crossing.
Not only my father, but hundreds of others had to look for better pastures. The big copper country strike blew everything. That's why so many left, situated their families on some piece of land, got a cow or two to get milk and butter for the family. But the reason for going to Painesville, a man by the name of Vitaly was a real estate salesman. Sure, high-pressured all these folks into the backwoods of Painesville.
The Painesville and Bruce Crossing railroad stations welcomed these new Finnish settlers, who brought their meager belongings to their new stump farms. Following Finnish tradition, these pioneers first built log saunas and lived in them while they grubbed the land with hoes and blasted stumps with dynamite. It was said that Finnish was the only language the stumps understood. By 1930, over 90% of families in the area were Finnish immigrants.
351 families spoke Finnish. 22 families spoke German, 8 families spoke Polish, 8 families spoke Norwegian, 8 families spoke Swedish, 3 families spoke English, 2 Russian, and 1 Lithuanian. The population of Stanner Township was 1,395 in 1930.
Most of the people had 40 acres, which isn't really an optimal amount of ground for a farm. But with the equipment they had, maybe a team of horses, and if they had a team. But they had the ground, and so they milked a couple of cows. A lot of it was strictly subsistence.
Life wasn't easy. In the winter months, men worked nearby logging camps, while the wives took care of the children and the cows. Wages at these lumber camps were poor, 85 cents per day. Food and supplies were hard to get. Finnish settlers didn't have money available all the time and were not able to get credit from local merchants. There was nothing hushed about the talk of exorbitant prices and poor merchandise and the low prices paid the farmers for their produce.
They really saw business people as taking advantage of them.
There was a problem, and the Finns knew a solution: cooperation.
Trying to get the best possible deals, for the food that and the goods that you needed to run that farm were very, very important. And so the co-op really provided an excellent means for them to get the best possible deal by doing it collectively.
As we used to say here, talko or working together it's a normal part of rural life.
The cooperative, it was a bunch of people got together and pooled their money to buy to start this. They pooled their money to buy groceries for the local people, and then the people come here to get their groceries, and then by buying it from this cooperative, we all formed a cooperative society.
These new Bruce Crossing cooperators became a distant branch of the Farmers Co-op Trading Company of Hancock, which required $1,500 in cash towards the purchasing of their capital stock. For 3 months, the farmers went door to door to their neighbors, promoting this new venture, and sold shares at $5 each. $700 worth of shares were sold. The money was raised, a building was rented, consumer goods and supplies were purchased, and the cooperative store in Bruce Crossing opened for business on May 1st, 1917.
Farmers had a way to bring their products to market, and families had a way to be able to purchase groceries and other necessary items.
The new cooperators now had a way to buy supplies in quantity lots at good prices to sell to members. Coffee, sugar, peas, beans, cereal, flour, and many other items arrived on the train in 100-pound barrels. Eggs, meat, and dairy products were locally sourced. Members could now buy each other's farm products for a fair price and sell them to each other, bridging the link between local producers and consumers. When the cooperative store opened in 1917, it had 71 members.
If you were a member of the co-op, you shopped here. You could shop here, but you had to be a member in order to do so. Over the years, that evolved into a more lax status as it is even today, that anybody can shop at any co-op where you go.
Other residents saw the advantages of the cooperative, and within 5 years, the number of members doubled, and in 10 years, quadrupled. Soon after opening, the Bruce Crossing Cooperative Store found itself at odds with the management and directors of the Hancock store. They wanted to be independent, as they had their own local board of directors from the very beginning, and they wanted the savings to be distributed locally instead of making up for the losses of the other stores up north. Distance was also an issue. It's 60 miles today by car, but back then it was 100 miles or more by train. On March 12, 1919, with a constitution and bylaws in hand, an independent settlers cooperative trading company was incorporated, based on the Rochdale principles of cooperation. Cooperation is as old as humanity, but the very first consumers' cooperative was in Rochdale, England in 1844, when flannel weavers pooled $140 and started their own store with the intention of buying honest food at honest prices.
There were two major types of cooperatives, those so-called consumers cooperatives and producers cooperatives. And those who were producing cooperatives, they were like for milk or dairy products. And the consumers cooperatives were the stores where you could go and buy.
These Rochdale pioneers, as they were called, created the principles of cooperation. Everyone over 18 years of age would be eligible for membership regardless of religion, politics, gender, or occupation. Goods were to be sold to members at the lowest possible cost. Each person or member had one vote regardless of how many shares were held, and surplus profits were to be shared with members based on the amount of purchases they made at the co-op.
Wasn't the philosophy of the co-op of those days is to make tons of money. They would rather have the consumer or the patron owner get the rewards in their lower prices, and consequently hopefully get more members and grow the company. And
this form of economic democracy was way ahead of its time. Women were welcome in co-ops and were given equal voting rights and dividends. The progressive ideals of the Rochdale pioneers quickly spread to the United States, with cooperative businesses starting on the East Coast and the Upper Midwest in the mid to late 1800s. The first cooperative business in Michigan was the Finnish Mutual Fire Insurance Company of Calumet, founded in 1889. It was the parent company of today's Northern Mutual Insurance. Likewise, the cooperative movement was developing in Finland.
The first cooperative stores which were founded by the Finns were founded in the United States before they were even founded in Finland. It's a few years difference. But the growth of the cooperative movement, it happened in both countries in about the same time.
Finnish immigrants are credited as being among the first to have introduced the consumers' cooperative to America, particularly in the Lake Superior region.
Probably it has something to do with the Finnish culture and heritage that Finns were very eager to participate in the common activities and so-called community activities, which was directed to the cooperative.
The first Finnish-American cooperative store was opened in Monaga, Minnesota in 1903. By the time settlers opened in 1917, 65 other Finnish cooperatives were well underway in the upper Midwest. That number rapidly grew, and during the first half of the 20th century, almost every Finnish settlement had its own cooperative store. To the Finnish immigrants, cooperatives were more than buying and selling at a fair price. They embraced a philosophy of working together for the common good and cooperation as a way of life and a way to change the world. Elizabeth Sillanpää Nurmi-Rango wrote in her memoirs,
We ate, slept, worked, and believed in co-ops. That's what helped a lot of poor people get going, not be robbed by some private business when there really wasn't anything to be had. At least you got trade rebates back from the co-op every December. I remember one December getting a check for $660. Nice Christmas gift. A private businessman would have put it in his pocket.
But beyond buying and selling, the co-op stores were social centers.
Painesville Co-op was like a kind of a gathering place for for the farmers. In the wintertime, there was a grate in the middle of the floor on the back end. There they'd go on, they'd find something to sit on, and they'd gab back there. And I sat there with them guys, and old-timers, and now I'm an old-timer. And, I mean, they had so many stories to tell, which was, you know, for a kid, it was great just to listen to them. And it was all in Finn.
Well, actually, the reason I got hired in a gas station when I was a young kid, because I could converse with the people that come in to buy gas. I could speak Finnish, because a lot of people back in 55 didn't speak English hardly.
The store clerk had to understand Finnish because there'd be all these Finnish people coming in.
The Finnish co-ops allowed immigrants to hold on to their cultural identity.
Everything was in Finnish years ago. All the minutes and everything was taken in Finnish.
It wasn't until 1958 that settlers' board meeting minutes were written in English, far behind the rest of the region who had already switched.
13. päivä huhtikuuta 1929. Keskusteltiin siitä kieltosajalla. Townshipin vuosikokous oli kieltänyt haalin käytön osuuskunnaltamme. Kiellon pätevyydestä selvää ottamaan määrättiin liikenhoitaja, esimies ja kirjori tarkoituksella saada käyttöoikeus haaliin taikka saada se suljetuksi muilta ryhmiltä.
Finnish halls were also constructed as an important part of the culture of the Finnish immigrants and were the sites of dances, plays, socials, and lectures. The co-op hall in Bruce Crossing was formed for another reason.
The reason they built that hall initially is because when they wanted to have an annual meeting, the township would not allow them to use their hall because they had the communist connection.
Local leaders were convinced, without proof, that Settlers Co-op was a left-leaning, socialist organization and consequently denied the use of the township hall for meetings. In response, 80 co-op store members organized an independent hall cooperative and constructed the co-op hall in 1930. Ironically, in years later, the co-op hall members were accused of being too far to the right when they wouldn't let the Finnish socialists use their hall. The hall's drama club performed plays in Finnish and English. The basketball club raised funds to install a basketball hoop within the hall.
And it was a place where the Knights of Kaleva sometimes had programs, which had a chapter here in Bruce Crossing.
With the slogan, "Sooner or later you'll be a cooperator," the Hall Association built a spirit of community and contributed to their own understanding of the American dream, striving to better themselves and their neighbors through working cooperatively.
And Settlers Co-op Hall, that was quite the place. We showed our high school play there, and there was movies. It was a movie house there for a while. You go. I don't remember what the admission was, but the seats weren't very comfortable. But we were all tickled we have to go to a movie.
Movies started there, I think, in 1930. Being young and living 2.5 miles out of town, and then watching a really scary movie and then walking home. And I know that every post out there was alive and coming after me.
And then they used to have Viola Turpinen dances over at the Co-op Hall quite often, probably once, 2-3 times a summer.
Big-name celebrities like famed Finnish-American accordionist Viola Turpinen and in later years TV host Carl Pellenpää had concerts and dances at the hall.
And when they'd have the Sumikutsu dances with Carl Pellenpää, the cars would go out all 4 directions from town. There'd be a lot of people here.
I learned to dance over there. So I know my mother didn't want me to go even because I was too young. I was probably about 13, 14 years old when I first went there. That was a popular place to go.
Another cooperative social gathering place was the Co-op Park, also called Central Park.
The Co-op Park was about the greatest place in the summertime when they had their big parties. And I would go down there early in the morning, and I'd be the only one there with maybe 2 guys would be sitting there talking, and the women were cooking already. There was a built-in stoves on a hillside, and that was 1.5 miles north of Bruce's. And then when everything got set up, They had ring toss, which was the sealing ring for bottles that used to have the zinc top on them. And then we'd get all full and everything from eating there. So then you'd hope that they'd leave early so you could go around and dig around and all this stuff and maybe find some pennies and nickels and dimes that they had left there.
The success of the Finnish-American cooperative movement was due to the hard work and passion of board directors and managers who crusaded the cooperative message and loyal members who trusted in the concept to keep it going.
Sillian was one of the founders of the Settlers Co-op Trading Company. He was also one of the founders of the Ontonagon Valley Co-op Creamery Association and active in the organization of Co-op Services Incorporated.
Emil Ojanes, who went on to write Settlers' 40th anniversary booklet in both Finnish and English, managed the Bruce Crossing store from 1926 to 1931. His wife Jenno was active in many of the co-op-inspired organizations regarding education and social life, especially in regard to the philosophy of the cooperative movement. J.J. Polke began his cooperative career in 1920 when he attended the CCW Cooperative Business and Managerial School in Superior, Wisconsin. In 1921, at the completion of his courses, he was hired as the bookkeeper at Settlers Cooperative Trading Company. He held this position for about 1.5 years when he was promoted to general manager of the store. He managed Settlers Co-op for 22 years. His wife Hilma was a clerk in the store before they were married. Co-op members were also very active in how their cooperative store was operated.
I know my dad said when they used to have annual meetings, they'd start the annual meeting early on Saturday. They'd go all day long. Then they'd break for the farmers to go home to do their chores. And sometimes they'd come back at night, and then sometimes they'd come back Sunday to finish.
You'd be surprised how much because the Finnish community, how detailed they wanted to be, and everything had to be just so. If it wasn't so, they'd argue about it for probably 2-3 hours at a meeting. They lasted until midnight.
So what did you talk about? Every can of beans in the store or what?
And they'd argue over a penny. If the price of something went up a penny, they'd argue about that.
You know, our annual meeting, we can maybe an hour.
And now people wouldn't sit that long in a meeting because time was the no essence in those days.
The local co-op owners, members, they were thinking of for years that they need to make it easier to buy big amount of goods, for example, getting the prices lower, and also the central organization could organize many practical things.
In July 1917, 19 delegates representing 9 Finnish-American cooperatives from Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota met in Superior, Wisconsin. They felt a need for a central purchasing organization to serve them and formed the Central Cooperative Exchange. The corporate headquarters and warehouse operations were located in Superior. Settlers automatically acquired a charter membership in the CCE as they were still a branch of the Hancock Co-op at that time. By 1928, there were 84 member cooperatives and sales over $1.5 million. This caught the eye of the American Communist Party. Although one of the early Rochdale principles of the cooperative movement was to stay politically neutral, there was always the undertone of the Finnish co-ops being an instrument of leftist politics. A division ran deep among Finnish cooperators over what role socialism should play, which would divide Finnish communities in subsequent years.
This Central Cooperative Exchange, which was the main organization and the central organization, it was kind of radical originally. Kind of radical, I would say. And in the late 1920s, the Communist Party, which was quite influential in the Finnish-American labor circles, they wanted to take guidance of this Central Cooperative Exchange, and also in that way the economic resources of the cooperative stores. to help spreading the communist idea.
This flirtation with communism didn't sit well with suppliers, who began to refuse business to the CCE. The exchange now had to buy directly from producers and do its own packaging. The exchange began its own Red Star Cooperator's Best brand. Soon, settlers and other cooperatives across the region were stocking goods adorned with a red star and the hammer and sickle emblematic of the Soviet Union. The CCE also sponsored a Red Star Chorus and the Red Star Flower Girls, who toured the co-ops with dances and plays promoting the co-op brand and class solidarity.
There arose a big dispute among the Finnish-American cooperative people.
Settlers was the 10th largest member store of the CCE in 1929 and was caught in the middle of this political firestorm. Settlers' early historians wrote, Bruce Crossing was one of the focal points in the CCE area-wide clash. At an annual membership meeting, Settlers Co-op members overwhelmingly voted to remain politically neutral.
The big thing was when they refused then to send the money to Superior, because what happened is Superior was sending it to Russia, part of it.
So there were leaders who wanted to do this, but it was very soon visible that not all the members of the cooperatives or Central Cooperative Exchange, they didn't want this kind of radical attitude and the linking of the cooperatives and the communists. It became an international dispute even when Communist International from Moscow, they sent some delegates to the United States in which they wanted to tighten the cooperation between International Communist Movement, American Communist Party, and the Finnish-American cooperatives. So it was a, so to say, high-level politics.
At the annual CCE meetings in 1929 and 1930, delegates from member cooperatives voted 229 to 16 to keep communistic politics out of the cooperatives.
They were kicked out because they couldn't take over, and they established their own new competing cooperative central organization.
The Mass Co-op store of Mass City, a community 14 miles north of Bruce Crossing, was one of the cooperatives that joined the Workers and Farmers Cooperative Unity Alliance of Superior, becoming a so-called Red Co-op.
There were more than 20 cooperative stores which went to this radical communist type cooperative central organization.
In 1933 and 34, the Mass Co-op opened branches in Wausau Siding and Bruce Crossing. To counter, Settlers Cooperative opened its own white branch store in Mass City in 1934. In both communities, the white and red stores were practically on the same block.
Customers would argue who was more communist. Mass Co-op is more communist. No, that other co-op is more communist.
I worked for a few months in that store, and I didn't realize a person that I knew real well, she had worked there too. And she said, "Oh, now your name is on the list." I said, "What list?" She said, told me what it was, and I said, "I'm out of here now."
After the political split and the communists expelled, the CCE changed its name to the Central Cooperative Wholesale. The hammer and sickle was removed from the label, and eventually the red star too, being replaced with only the word co-op.
Every cupboard we opened, that's all it said was co-op, co-op coffee, co-op this. Everything was, the co-op label was on most of the products back then.
The CCW flourished through the creation of new consumers' cooperatives and the expansion of existing stores.
Especially after the political crisis was over, it became very successful, and it started to be a model to other co-ops in North America.
Many Bruce Crossing cooperators became employed at the Central Cooperative Wholesale in Superior, or served the board. Charles Sillanpää served as the director of the CCW from 1933 to 39 and was the Cooperative Publishing Association director for 8 years. The CCW devoted a lot of time and energy in educational efforts and training courses for member societies. The education department also organized youth programs with the aim of building favorable attitudes towards the cooperative movement in young people.
They saw that and understood that it was very important to get whole families involved in cooperative activities. And not only the youth, but most important in developing work was to get women involved.
Cooperative newspapers printed out of Superior also lined the shelves of Settlers Co-op. Taisto Harinen, son of one of the earliest board secretaries, Sulo Harinen, and writer of the first Settlers history, worked for the Cooperative Publishing Association in Superior. By 1940, the CCW had over 100 member cooperatives, mostly Finnish, with combined sales of over $14 million. The Finns became so well known for their cooperative activities that at the time it was said that if two Finnish Americans were seen together on a Saturday evening, they were either going to take a sauna or were organizing a new cooperative. In 1955, Settlers was one of the largest members of the CCW, third in the amount of their investment and fourth in the amount of their purchases. Cited as a Finnish-American masterpiece, the Central Cooperative Wholesale became the largest cooperative central organization in the United States. Before Settlers Cooperative faced the wave of political disputes and before it became one of the largest members of the CCW, it saw periods of obstacles and of growth. From its very beginning, Settlers Co-op handled locally produced farm cream for the farmers. Cream testing was done in the store and needed a fire. On a hot, dry July day in 1922, the sparks from the chimney ignited the wooden shingles. Having no organized fire department at the time, the bucket brigade could do nothing to stop the blaze. The co-op store and 3 adjacent stores burned to the ground. The front of their warehouse was remodeled into a store and additional warehouse space was added in the rear of the building. This building was used as a store until 1939. Now it serves as Settlers Feed Mill. The co-op fared well during the Great Depression, as did many other cooperatives across the Lake Superior region. Instead of closing, they multiplied and expanded. Membership increased. Only 2 years of net losses were recorded at Settlers Co-op from 1917 to 1939. Not everyone was a fan of the success of the cooperatives.
August 2nd, 1926, a number of people from all parts of the county assembled at the town hall of Bruce Crossing Monday evening to listen to a talk by a recruitment Klansman from the Copper Country, and it is reported that a number signed the Pledge of Allegiance. Following the meeting, a large cross was burned in a field near the hall, and the assembly dispersed.
Speaking convincingly in both Finnish and English, the recruiters caused a brief frenzy that resulted in a few more clandestine cross burnings. Fortunately, the Klan activity in the area was short-lived. Eventually, even many of those who sided with the KKK's anti-cooperative beliefs resumed their support of Settlers Co-op. Settlers had members from the Painesville community from the very beginning, and in 1925 they asked for a branch store. A new building was purchased for Painesville in 1937, and the old store used as a warehouse. This warehouse still stands today.
It was the only store that was self-serve long before they ever thought about that, because the post office was there and you would just bring your groceries up to the counter.
And John Murdo he attended the post office. And we used to always run up there to get candy and stuff. And
in 1926, Settlers built a gasoline and oil service station on the northwest corner of the intersection. Because Ford Motor Company hadn't built a car that worked in the winter, the station was only open in the summer months. In the fall of 1928, the Trout Creek area settlers asked for a branch store. Capital was raised and a brand new store building was built immediately. The Harts building on Main Street was purchased in 1943 and the former store building sold.
When I was young, Martin Karanen was the manager there at that time when we were kids. He was a very nice man. I really liked him as a kid. You could go in there, he'd give you a penny candy, which for a penny you probably got a dozen.
A branch store was added on the main street of Ewan in 1947. The Ewan store only lasted 15 years, closing in 1963. From the beginning, the co-op store bylaws stated that all sales are to be cash sales. That rule was never adhered to, and goods were sold on credit. Farmers also struggled to obtain loans from the local bank. When a handful of farmers approached the co-op store about organizing a credit union, a member-owned financial cooperative in conjunction with the store, the co-op agreed. Settlers Cooperative Credit Union held its first public meeting September 30th, 1932, with the intention of providing loans to each other so they could make their purchases in cash. When Dick Hauser took the management position at Settlers Co-op in 1966, he was in for a little surprise.
After about a week, they said, oh, by the way, you are also the manager of the Settlers Co-op Credit Union. And so I had to do a quick study on what credit unions were about because I really didn't know much about them.
The credit union operated inside the co-op store for almost 50 years, sharing a small office with the store staff. In 2008, the credit union constructed a larger, modern facility just east of Bruce Crossing. Today, Settlers Federal Credit Union is a multi-million-dollar operation. The cooperative spirit of the Bruce Crossing area Finnish immigrants and their children was not limited to Settlers Co-op, but led to the creation of numerous other cooperative ventures in the early 20th century. In 1930, the Cooperative Oil Association was organized by members of Settlers Co-op, one of the earliest cooperatives dealing in bulk gasoline and oil. The creation of the Ontonagon Valley Creamery Association in Bruce Crossing in 1925 led to the formation of one of the area's largest employers. Prior, farmers sold most of their cream through Settlers Co-op store to privately owned creameries. In 1923, 313 tons of cream was shipped out of Bruce Crossing. That would produce 210,000 pounds of butter. With this much cream leaving the area, the idea was born that if farmers had their own creamery, they'd stand to earn larger profits from their product. Despite the near hand-to-mouth existence of many local families, farmers across the Ontonagon Valley managed to collect $9,650 in share capital. The Settlers Co-op, which was in sound financial state, loaned the creamery an additional $4,500 to start their venture. The very first month turned a profit of $500 to the 170 farmer owners. Not too long after, private cream buyers, disagreements within the membership and board, rumors, and a drunken butter maker all threatened the creamery's operation. Eventually, the quarrels settled down and the creamery began to grow.
The creamery had something like over 450 different farmers shipping milk and cream to it.
The creamery in Bruce Crossing was the first in the area to teach the farmers the necessity of producing fresh, clean milk. After a few years, 70% of the butter was sweet cream butter. In 1937, cheese production began.
If we had 20 cents, we could go and buy one of these when I was young. And if we didn't have any money, we'd go in the creamery and they'd give us some cheese curds.
In 1950, the creamery was the largest farmer-owned milk products manufacturing plant in Upper Michigan. It employed over 30 people, from the butter and cheese makers to the men who picked up the farmers' milk cans.
We did damn near everything in there. We were in the intake. We took the milk in off the trucks, weighed it, pasteurized it, and put it in cheese vats for the cheese makers. We had a sample each can. We had a smell in each can.
Yeah.
Sometimes it didn't smell too good.
I remember my brother Albert when he hauled milk to the creamery, and he'd lift 2 of those cans at a time and put it on the conveyor. 2 cans. That was a big thing.
Every year we went to the state fair. Our cheese was there. It won #1. And the butter. The butter was really good. That won awards.
The Ontonagon Valley Creamery closed on November 19, 1979, with the last can of cream, can number 36. In 1939, at the start of World War II, the co-op constructed a new and modern store building in Bruce Crossing, across the street from the original. The loan was paid off in only 4 years.
Probably in 1937, finished in 1939, opened a store second week, October in 39.
They had everything there. Yeah, at that time, then they started having the bakery, and they had the meat section was really nice. They would during the war, you'd have to go in there and order what you wanted to get if there was any. Then they'd wrap those packages up, and they'd put your name on that.
In 1951, a feed grinding plant was installed across the street in the previous store building.
It had a mill in it, but no feed there, and they had all the feed stored in the back part of this main store. They were doing that because most of the floor in that old building had collapsed, and so there really wasn't any place to put anything. So one of the first orders of business was to clean that old floor out, put some fill in there, and then we poured some cement so we could get the feed out of the back of the store and get it over there where it belonged to make it more convenient for the farmers.
In the heydays, I remember working in a feed mill, and it was nothing to sometimes send out 3 or 4 truckloads of feed to ground feed a day.
For the first 40 years, customers were fully served by cashiers. Customers were forbidden from touching the saleable items. When the supermarket concept finally reached the Upper Peninsula, the co-op responded in 1958 by transforming from a full-service to a self-service store. Customers could now make their own selections from the prepackaged groceries on the shelves.
And when they did finally go to self-serve, and everyone said that'll never work, that people will steal them blind.
Part of the consumer cooperative business model is that if there is a need in the community for it, the co-op supplied it.
Even when I started in '72, the Trout Creek store sold clothing, shoes. As kids, we bought all our tennis shoes, Red Ball Jets in those days. You bought all your boots from there. Just about anything that you could think of, they handled back in those days.
Roy Anderson started working at the Bruce Crossing store in 1972.
We used to sell clothing, baby needs. We had a lot of farmers, so we had a lot of farming equipment. We had milking stuff for milking parlors. We sold appliances. We had stoves, refrigerators, freezers, dishware.
As the needs of the members changed, the co-op added new divisions and closed the doors on others. Settlers got into the fuel oil and coal business. They added a heating division to sell, service, and install gas and oil furnaces.
You had a community that relies on heat for at least 9 months of the year.
Man, we sold a lot of furnaces them days. I'd be working on a furnace job over in Mass City at 9, 10 o'clock at night. Mr. Hauser had me punching a hole in their chimney down the basement at 10 o'clock at night. I said, Dick, I don't think these people really appreciate me pounding on their chimney at 10 o'clock at night. They probably want to go to sleep.
And then, of course, that led to the moving into the LP gas business, because we were installing these systems and then basically giving the LP business to some other supplier. And so it looked like an opportunity to get the co-op some new income, new cash flow.
In March of 1971, the first fill in the bulk LP plant took place, and since then it has been fundamental in keeping Settlers Co-op alive. Although Finnish American co-ops of the Upper Midwest survived the Great Depression and World War II, they couldn't foresee the impact of the dramatic societal shift of the post-war 1950s. Co-op members naively thought that integrity and quality could compete with flashy advertising and new, elegant supermarkets.
They were so attractive, so to say, that people who had their cars, and also roads were better and better after war years, and so it was quite normal that families, they could drive more and more miles to find a supermarket or different types of stores.
In the late 50s, many of the Central Cooperative Wholesale's mainstay stores closed their doors. Likewise, the Unity Alliance-sponsored, or Red Co-ops, were entirely gone by the early 1960s, including the 3 mass co-ops. it became apparent to the Settlers Co-op leadership that branch stores in Ewan and Painesville, each only a few miles away, were no longer profitable. The Ewan store closed in 1963 and Painesville in 1967.
Someone commented to me that the ones that probably liked it the least were the kids that went to the Painesville school, because they'd run over there and get snacks and so on. But and there were a few people there that sort of held that against me.
In 1963, even though they were still generating profits, members of the CCW voted to merge with Midland Cooperatives Incorporated of Minneapolis. At this time, only about 100 Finnish-founded cooperative stores still served consumers in the Lake Superior region. 10 years later, that number dropped by half.
Older clientele, the older patrons passed on. The younger people just didn't see the cooperative, the need to be a cooperative member, you know. And you're seeing that today, unfortunately.
One of the reasons why Settlers succeeded is perhaps the long distance to larger stores and populated areas.
Our cooperative here has been fortunate to have not a whole lot of major competition move close to us. Of course, there's nothing here. We're in the middle of nowhere, practically.
The reason must be good management. So they have had good managers, and those people, active people, which are needed in every cooperative.
You have to understand that I didn't just do these things on my own. I brought the ideas to the board of directors, and it was the board's decision to make things move forward.
In 1981, Marvin Larson became the new manager, a position he retained until 2014, making him the longest-serving manager in the co-op's history.
When I took over, the co-op was in dire straits, but we clawed our way back.
Trout Creek was costing us just under $1,000 a month to keep it open, and Mass City was costing just about $800 a month to keep it open, and they were just bleeding us. In '85, we did sell both stores.
The closure of these branch stores saved the store from bankruptcy and positioned them to face their next challenge.
We owed too much money to too many places, and everybody was barking for their money.
We were indebted to Midland Cooperatives because that's the only place we were allowed to buy from. They dictated the cost of everything, and they gave away our groceries on our sales days.
Then Midland was absorbed by Land O'Lakes Cooperatives. And it came down to where we were struggling somewhat at the time, having a hard time paying them too. So they came in with a proposition saying, turn the propane business over to us, to Land O'Lakes, and Settlers would still be the manager of it. So we'd do all the work and they'd collect any profits from it. We thought, that doesn't sound very good. So we went to the State Bank of Ewan and gave a proposal to them, and the State Bank of Ewan financed us so that we could pay Land O'Lakes off.
Then we were able to buy independently 100%, and then we were able to turn things around and get things going again.
In 1985, the co-op continued to streamline operations.
First thing we did was move the entryway to the south side so we got away from the steps. And then we put 2 gas pumps out there. So we moved the gas station from across the road and had the fuel sales right there at the grocery store.
We started looking at, our store was small. We were just sitting stagnant there. We couldn't go nowhere, so we started looking into adding on and building a new part for the grocery.
It took 2 years to finish the work. And the store manager showed me the plan. I said, this is exactly, and this is the plan they showed us, and we agreed. I said, go on and do it. We borrowed $4 million, that's where we are today.
In 1999, Settlers finished a 10,000 square foot expansion, adding a new supermarket-style grocery store to the east end. The original grocery store was converted into sporting goods, offices, and the beer and wine department. The section that once housed appliances, hardware, and sporting goods became a high-traffic convenience area with a full-service deli.
We were told that the first year we built the store, we're going to have a lot of business, a lot of sales, because people come in to see new things, to see what's there. Well, that first year of our business that year, we had enough sales and stuff and enough profit that we declared a patronage refund that year.
Over 100 years, patrons and members have been served by many friendly faces. Today, Settlers employs almost 50 local people.
I have worked here for 44 years. November 21st, 1972, I started. I did 38 years without missing a day's work.
I started July 15th, 1972, so that's, I'm in my 45th year. In my career, I've seen a lot of changes in the meat departments. When I first started, it was all hanging beef, where you got your beef in and sides with all the bones in them.
For Settlers Co-op board members, service isn't just an idea, but has been a way of life.
It might be foolish to say, but when I got on the board of directors, my grandfather, John Perla, was on there years and years ago, and I remember when he used to go to meetings. And my goal was to be on there longer than he was. Well, I'm sure I surpassed it already.
Through decades of change, the co-op has remained true to the philosophies on which it was founded.
Settlers Co-op today is continuing to provide that tradition of providing families the opportunity to be able to buy products at the fairest prices that allow the business to remain viable, financially viable. It's more challenging. Well, it was challenging back then. It continues to be today.
A difficult reality facing the co-op today is that there's only 800 some people living in the area, about half of what it was in 1930.
The biggest challenge to our area today is less people equals less people shopping equals less business. It makes it more and more of a challenge for all of our local businesses, and we are very dependent on tourism. So we're dependent on our local people, but yet if it wasn't for the tourism, we probably wouldn't be here.
They keep the store so nice and clean, and it's just a nice place. I cringe when people say they go out of town to buy all their groceries. Well, lots of luck. Then they'd be the people that, when we had no store, they'd be the one that would be beefing the most.
Not all aspects of the original cooperative model can be applied anymore. From 1917 to 1986, shareholders received almost $1 million in patronage refunds, either in cash or shares of interest-bearing stock. Settlers Co-op no longer sells shares and has not been able to issue a patronage refund for many years.
You can't buy a share, but you can become a member by putting the $5 into a member equity fund. You know, if you want to become a member, you just go to the office and say you want to become a member, and they'll be glad to take your $5.
Cooperatives were born because of economic needs, and they formed the basis for many kinds of community activities. So you can compare it in many ways with different Finn halls or even churches or other societies, because they gathered Finnish-related people to their clubs and meetings. And cooperatives was, in a sense, it was one form of this kind of club activity and community activity. But the necessity behind is the economic reason. So they wanted to do certain things, and the cooperative system was the best one.
Besides Settlers Co-op in Bruce Crossing, there are co-op stores in Trinary and Rudyard, Michigan, Wright and Finland, Minnesota, and Iron River, Wisconsin. For many communities, only their memory remains. One place is dedicated to keeping this memory alive. The Finnish American Heritage Center and Archive at Finlandia University, the only existing institute of higher learning founded by Finns in North America, is committed to doing what it can to preserve the history of Finnish American cooperatives, as well as all aspects of Finnish American culture and life. In preparation for its centennial, the co-op is mindful of its past. To ensure their history remains, they've chosen to archive their materials at the Finnish American Heritage Center.
100 years is a long time, and it's actually a nice coincidence that the whole nation celebrates the centennial the same year.
While Finns around the world celebrate the country's centenary, the cooperative town of Bruce Crossing thanks to its Finnish immigrants, has a centennial to celebrate as well.
Nice day for a celebration.
One very much in common with Finland.
Finland is the most cooperative country in the world, many people say. For example, nowadays, 4 million Finns are a member or have membership to co-op, and the whole population here is 5.5 million.
It may be difficult for people today to understand how first and second generation Finnish Americans could be so committed to these cooperative ideals. By patronizing stores and businesses they own together, they could create a better life and a better community. At one time, Bruce Crossing had a half-dozen cooperative businesses. Look closer. History surrounds you. Look closer. This is not just a grocery store. Look closer. There is still a place and a community cooperatively yours.